Chaos at aid distribution sites in southern Gaza. The UN has distanced itself from the operations of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that's backed by the US and Israel. What's behind this move to establish a separate aid mechanism, and what needs to change to help desperate Palestinians? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. Gaza has been under total blockade by Israel for nearly 3 months. Aid agencies have been stopped from delivering the most basic of supplies, leaving 2.3 million people starving. Now, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is delivering food packages, but it's backed by Israel and the US and uses American security contractors. Its first attempt at distribution allowed in very limited numbers of people and turned into chaos. The foundation has also faced strong criticism from the UN and other aid agencies. They say it doesn't allow humanitarian principles and appears to be weaponizing aid. So why has Israel decided to let in some aid and only under an agency it backs? Could this be part of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's stated plan to take control of Gaza? And ultimately, what does this mean for Palestinians who are starving? We'll get to our guests in just a moment. First, this report from Imogen Kimber.
All these people are desperate for aid to hold off starvation inflicted by Israel that has barely let any food into the Strip for nearly 3 months.
We're dying of hunger. The children are saying, "Father, I want to eat, so I want to sell even my blood to feed them." We can't find anything to eat.
This aid is being distributed by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, that is backed by Israel and the US and based in Switzerland. The organisation's plan has been criticised by the UN and other aid groups, who say it appears to weaponize aid. Chaos broke out during the first delivery of food, with Israeli soldiers opening fire as people rushed forward. Several Palestinians were killed. Others were too desperate to hold back.
We don't care about gunfire or shelling. What matters for us is to bring food to our children.
Israel says the GHF is a mechanism designed to assume control of all delivery of aid in Gaza and exclude aid organisations like the UN.
We're going to put many more of these. And the idea is basically to take away the humanitarian looting as a tool of war of Hamas, to give it to the population, eventually to have a sterile zone in the south of Gaza where the entire population can move for its own protection.
Israel has long claimed Hamas loots supplies, but this has never been proven, and the armed group denies the allegation. The UN criticised the operation on Tuesday, saying pictures of the chaos were heartbreaking, to say the least, and explained why it won't be involved.
We do not participate in this modality. It is a distraction from what is actually needed, which is a reopening of all the crossings into Gaza, a secure environment within Gaza, and faster facilitation of permissions and final approvals of all the emergency supplies that we have just outside the border and needs to get in.
Other international organisations are also boycotting the scheme, saying it doesn't follow humanitarian principles.
If there is a reduction in the number of sites where people can access assistance, that would effectively reduce or exclude the most vulnerable people in Gaza from accessing aid. It's not feasible, that's not practical. In addition to that, humanitarian assistance is only humanitarian when it's delivered independent from political and military objectives.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly stated Israel aims to control all of Gaza and wants Palestinians to leave. And critics say controlling and limiting aid would appear to fit that plan. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's now bring in our guests. In London is Chris Gunness, former Director of Communications for UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. In Gaza City is Amjad Shawa, who's the Director of the Palestinian NGOs Network. Also in London, Eyal Weizman, who's a professor at Goldsmiths, the University of London, and author of The Least of All Possible Evils, Humanitarian Violence from Arendt to Gaza. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us. Amjad Shawa in Gaza City. Let me begin with you. The images that we saw from Rafah were shocking. They were heartbreaking. As a humanitarian from Gaza, when you saw those pictures of people climbing fences, crying for food, being shot at, what did that moment represent? Were you surprised, or was this to be expected?
Thank you. Yes, it was very sad moments, as we used to have along the 600 days of the war. But this time it's shown how much the effect of the starvation, that the people had to walk about 2.5 hours to reach this military basement guarded by militants, in order to get some food back to their malnutrition children. These people were insulted, suffocated all the time, but this time it's different and difficult. And what we witnessed, that this, as I said, that these militants shot, and the Israeli army shot towards these crowds who were just trying to get some food. And this scared me, because this is the application of Netanyahu plan to force the people to displace from Gaza north towards Rafah, as he wants, as his plan for.
Amjad, before we get into what's motivating this plan by the Israelis, let me just ask you, what you heard and what you saw about the aid that was distributed. What was actually in the aid package that was given to some of the people in Rafah? I read that some of it, mostly, was dried and prepackaged food like pasta and beans, food that needs to be cooked, I understand, but that's extremely difficult right now in Gaza, isn't it?
Yes, very limited amount of items, which I think it's for 2-3 days of family of 5-6 members. So just to let you know that we, as a humanitarian, we will not let this happen. Along the 19 months of the war, we used to get the supplies, the humanitarian supplies, to the people, to the neighborhoods, to the sites, not to get the people from where they are to this military basement to have small amount of aid. And we are working in kind of comprehensive approach, not only just to distribute such minimal amount of aid, and to use this way of dealing with the people and to shoot towards them by fire and to have tens of people who were injured. This kind of insulting of our people, it's very serious, and to be considered that this is the real plan of the Israeli, not to alleviate the suffering of the people, but also to deepen this humanitarian catastrophe. This will not solve the problem of starvation caused by the Israeli occupation through denial of the entry of the supplies to Gaza.
All right, Chris Gunness, let me come to you and ask you about your reaction. I mean, you've seen many crises during your time at UNRWA. What did you make of the scenes in Rafah?
I'm calling the GHF the Genocide Humanitarian Fig Leaf, because that's precisely what this is. It's a fig leaf for genocide. When an army that's been committing a genocide against 2.5 million people and starving it out in the way that it has done allows in just a handful of trucks, of course, this is going to happen. And according to unconfirmed ICRC sources, at least six people were killed by gunshot wounds. and well over 40 were injured because of gunshot wounds. And this is what happens when you let an aid organization be taken over by a bunch of cowboys, a bunch of mercenaries, a bunch of people who have absolutely no track record in delivering aid to situations like Gaza. There was no community consultation. That's absolutely essential when you're delivering aid. There was no attempt even to set up proper infrastructure. We saw the laughable pictures at the beginning of your show of those, it looked like a cattle pen. It was that insulting for the people of Gaza. There was no attempt to prepare the community. There was no consultation. There was no attempt to get the infrastructure up and running. And this gets to a very important point. Only UNRWA has the warehouses, the food distribution centres, the staff, 12,000 staff who have been working all the way through this crisis, delivering food. Coincidentally, everybody. So, it's an appalling situation. It's insulting. Gaza should be the most successful export economy on the Mediterranean. They've been reduced to abject food dependency in violation of international law. It's disgrace. This operation should end right now. The crossings should be opened, and UNRWA and the other professionals in the UN agency. UNRWA has a track record going back to the 1st of May 1950. Right. That's when they started delivering aid in Palestine. The professionals should take over from the amateurs. All we're going to see is more needless killing.
But Chris, of course, the Israelis and the Americans have said this operation was successful, even if there was a bit of chaos at the start of it, and they say they'll continue it. Eyal, let me come to you now. Your thoughts about what's happened. What went wrong with this alternative plan? Was it flawed in design? Was it flawed in execution, or both?
It's exactly the difference between a plan hatched on paper or on computer screen somewhere in Tel Aviv or in Washington. People think in the abstract, and the reality of starved people being channeled into this degrading architecture of control and supervision, being, pushed there by starvation. And of course, to expect people that are starving to be controlled in an organized way is completely idiotic. Of course, you would see those scenes of chaos. And of course, that chaos, as much as it is something that whenever we see an architecture of control being overrun by people, there is some hope in that, in the people's sort of response to all attempt to control them. There is a price to pay. The food has not been distributed. Right. This is a completely idiotic plan, and we see the result of it. Right. I think that.
Yeah, and Chris, Chris made an important point, Eyal, about the why. I mean, why establish a parallel, untested aid mechanism when the UN and established NGOs have the capacity and the experience and the networks to distribute this aid? What do you think, Eyal, this suggests about the motives behind this GHF operation and this new system of aid distribution that the Americans and Israelis are backing? I mean, what is ultimately the motive behind this?
So I think, according to our analysis, this is the end game of the genocide. This is the final stage of it. We have seen very early on during the genocide the complete systematic destruction of all agriculture and fisheries. That is, the capacity of Palestinians for food sovereignty, to feed themselves. Then we've seen the destruction of all aid distribution centers. We've seen it early on in attacks on bakeries. Then we've seen it moving into attacks on aid convoys that was going on. That enabled Israel to exercise control over allowing aid in through the checkpoints. Okay, so Israel wanted full control over aid. What they couldn't have exercise control of is over the distribution. So this is why I call it the end game of the genocide, where Israel is trying to wrestle control over the last element that fell outside of their control, is the actual distribution of aid. So they've created starvation, and during the last 3 months, they've intentionally created starvation in order to supposedly come up with a remedy for it, pushing through the starvation people into the infrastructure that they've put in place, which we've seen has been overrun at the get-go.
Amjad, I'll come to you in a moment, but Chris, you wanted to jump in. Chris, go ahead. To what extent do you think this plan is about feeding people?
Yeah, when Netanyahu was trying to justify the genocide humanitarian fig leaf, he said they were doing this because Hamas was stealing aid. Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Programme, said in the American media on the record over the weekend that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Hamas is stealing aid. And there's plenty of evidence that gangs who are enabled by Israel have been taking some of the food. So let's just get that right. There is no justification whatsoever in blaming Hamas.
Let me ask Amjad about that, Chris, because Amjad
Hamas will
is on the ground.
I think the other really... Sorry.
Yeah, on that point, I just wanted to get Amjad on that point because he's on the ground, of course, in Gaza. That argument, Amjad, that Chris mentioned there, that's been raised by the Israelis and Americans, that, you know, they're pushing for this plan because, you know, the aid is being diverted by Hamas. To what extent is there credible evidence of that happening on the ground at a large scale, aid being diverted? What have you seen in regards to that?
Let me start by the humanitarian system, the traditional one, the UN, the NGOs, and the national NGOs, which was attacked by the Israelis since the beginning of this war, mainly the UNRWA, which is the backbone for the humanitarian aid, which was banned by the Israeli Knesset, and now nothing entered to UNRWA, and most of the UNRWA premises destroyed, and also there is about 280 staff members of UNRWA killed. Also, the national NGOs, the international, there is so many restrictions of the work of this humanitarian structure. And then now, you know, they want to make it collapsing. So now they are trying to replace it by this military mechanism. Mm-hmm. And the aid convoys, which used to come through Karm Abu Salim commercial crossing, there is in certain areas which is controlled by the Israelis. There is gangs who stop these convoys and under the Israeli observation. And this happened so many times till the last week. There was a convoy of flour, about 15 trucks, which was looted by militants in Salah ad-Din Street, which is this area is evacuated, and the quadcopter is over. So it's this thing that we have a very credible humanitarian system, and we are working with the humanitarian principles to be applied in our aid distribution wherever the people are. But this time, through the provocation of Israel in this system, along the time, they wanted to smoothly put this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation on the track. It's not for Gaza, it's not a humanitarian, and it's not a foundation for Gaza Palestinians. Okay. It's to serve the Israeli security and politics.
All right, Chris, I'll let you continue your thought about to what extent is the GHF plan less about feeding people and more about using aid as a tool to reshape the political and territorial reality of Gaza?
Well, what we're seeing is forced displacement, and we're seeing ethnic cleansing under the auspices, as it were, of this operation. And as Eyal, I think, quite correctly said, this is the end game of the genocide, that, you know, you bomb these people into submission and they're trying to force them out of Gaza. But, you know, I look at the donors, because the donors have allowed this to get to where it is. The donors have sat on their hands and watched the Israelis try to dismantle UNRWA. There was a totally fictitious smear campaign based on the lie that was later shown by the Kelowna report, the independent report, to be a complete lie, that UNRWA staffers were involved in the October attacks. The donors then withdrew their funding on the basis of absolutely nothing. Well, those donors need to step up to the plate, both politically They have to do what the ICJ has demanded and have a sanctions program against Israel. So there has to be the political, the economic. They've got to obviously stop supplying America, Britain, Germany, these other countries, stop supplying the genocidal weaponry. And on the other side, they have to step up to the plate in terms of, first of all, stopping the starvation. Right. Then they've got to start doing the recovery. These are the donors. And then they've got to look at the complete reconstruction of Gaza. It sounds daunting, and it is daunting. You know, there are thousands and thousands of pieces of unexploded ordnance that have to be cleared. But in 2014, after a devastating war, not as bad as this one, Gaza, to some extent, to a large extent, was rebuilt. You give the Palestinians the opportunity to do this, and they will perform. Let me tell you, I've seen it time and time again.
Okay, let me ask you then, Eyal. Chris mentioned the ICJ there, and whether you think these recent events will affect the genocide case against Israel at the ICJ. I mean, the provisional measures that the ICJ called for was for Israel to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid and avoid actions that worsen the livelihoods of Palestinians. But from what we've seen in Gaza, especially yesterday, that hasn't happened. So how might these events impact that case?
So look, you know, Israel's defense on January 2024 was that it is warning the population, it's providing aid, and it's moving people for their safety. Now, in the current operation, it is admitting that the ethnic cleansing, the forced population transfer of Palestinians to places in southern Gaza are the aim of the operation. So it's completely undermining its own arguments that, you know, were laughable already in January 2024, but now are clearly seen to be what they are. When we speak about the end game of the genocide, Palestinians will be faced with, and this is Israel's plan, with two choices: to leave Gaza under the Trump or any other plan, or to die in Gaza. And that, in order to do that, one has to create the space in which it is happening. This is why spatial architectural analysis is very important in cases like that, because architecture, when an architect works on a plan, there is an intention to a plan. It is very clear in architectural analysis to see what is the intention. When you build a building, you have a certain program to do that. So we ask ourselves, what is the spatial architecture of Gaza designed for, if not for the genocide of the people, if not the transference of the entirety of the population to the one part of Gaza that has no agriculture, that is no development within it, there's no infrastructure, so that every bit of infrastructure, every bit of necessity that people need will be in the hands of the Israelis. Now we think that might be some kind of charity that Israel is doing to the people of Gaza by delivering some sort of laughable amount of aid. This is no charity. Firstly, Israel is forced into doing that. They wouldn't have done it if they wouldn't do it. And
there's been the suggestion that this could also be
in order to bring the population into the places right by the Gaza-Egypt border, where just one more push would see them out of the country.
And there's also been the suggestion, Eyal, that this is also about starving support for Hamas, about, you know, getting civilians, Palestinian civilians, to distance themselves from Hamas in the hopes of political change. What do you make of that?
Oh, but, you know, I think both Chris and Amjad said it very clearly. Palestinian society is accustomed in the distribution and division of aid. They know how to do it. There are infrastructure of UNRWA, there are other organizations in Gaza that know how to divide the aid. The society knows how to do it. It's been living under a murderous blockade for 2 decades, and it has learned how to do that very well. No plan done by some architects on the outside or implemented by people without experience in humanitarian aid could replicate that.
Right.
Palestinians know how to do that.
Chris, your thoughts about the motives and also this idea that this could be a way to push Palestinians to distance themselves from Hamas and lead to political change within Gaza?
Look, that's a joke. I go back to the elections in January 2006, where the world thought, oh, we'll let Hamas stand in elections, they won't get enough votes, that'll split the Palestinians, and there'll be no partner for peace, we'll never have to do a two-state solution. I mean, at every stage, the international community led by Israel has completely got wrong the analysis on the Palestinian side. And of course, the analysis is very much wishful thinking. And here again, we have more wishful thinking. The idea that people will do Israel's bidding in Gaza, do what the IDF has been incapable of doing for so long, in spite of saying time and time again that they're waging this genocidal war in order to destroy Hamas, destroy a political movement. Ha ha. I mean, we all know that you can't bomb a political and a social movement with high-altitude bombers, and this is going to be no different. I mean, all that's happened is Hamas is constantly being reinforced, as it were, politically and in all other respects, and I think this is going to backfire. But I mean, the good news is you can't spin genocide. You really can't spin genocide. You can dress it up as much as you can. And I think the scales are falling from the ice 19 months too late, of course. I think the Germans, and who knows, I mean, the Brits too, though they continue to sell £127 million worth of military aid. But, you know, you saw Trump raging spontaneously, apparently, against Putin. Maybe in one of his capricious fits, he'll suddenly turn on Netanyahu and make some spontaneous decision to cut all military aid. I mean, who knows what motivates Donald Trump?
We have heard that change of tone. Yeah, we have heard that change of tone from the Europeans, but not yet from the Trump administration. Amjad, let me come to you now and ask you your thoughts about what we've heard from both Chris and Eyal, and also the important question that Eyal raised and the choice that Palestinians in Gaza face today, leave or stay and die in Gaza. What is the mood on the ground?
I think today there was a boom, about this issue, and about 85% of the Gazans says clearly that they will stay in Gaza whatever the situation is. Nothing will uproot us from here. This is our land, and this is where we belong to, and we will not fulfill what Israel and Netanyahu want, to reoccupy Gaza without its people, and we are not investment project for any. So the issue of our forcible displacement, whatever the conditions will be, we are staying here in Gaza North, and the international community has to work hard in order to stop this genocide, this war against civilians, against the children, against women, to open the crossings, to re-enter the aid supplies, which is waiting now for 3 months, and part of it expired and damaged because of the denial of the Israeli towards its entrance, and at the same time to protect the civilians every day. Yes, I'm talking about starvation, but the issue of killing of children, women, elders, and to burn the bodies under their tents, this thing has to be stopped, and justice for these victims must be there.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you for a great discussion, an important discussion to have today. Thank you, Amjad, Shawa, Chris, Gunness, Eyal, Weizman. Thank you so much for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you, too, for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And, of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.